Good morning to our participants in PNG and the Pacific, and good evening to our US-based participants, and good day to everybody else. My name is Jane, and I'm a program officer with the Asia and the Pacific team at the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to our event today on COVID-19's impact on women-owned and operated MSMEs in Papua New Guinea. We have a great event prepared for you today, and as we get started, we'll first begin with some welcoming remarks from CIPE's Executive Director, Andrew Wilson.
Good morning, I'm Andrew Wilson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE as we like to call it. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome from Washington, D.C. to all of those who are joining today's event on the impact of COVID-19 on women-owned and operated MSMEs in Papua New Guinea. Today's event is made possible through PNG-AUS partnership support from the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's Economic Governance and Inclusive Growth team. I'd also like to thank our local MSME experts who are joining our panel today. You know, for 40 years, CIPE has worked with partners all over the world to craft business-driven solutions to socioeconomic issues that impact millions of people. And the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted economies and devastated livelihoods in an unprecedented way. Through these challenging times, CIPE has continued to work with local partners to empower and strengthen the private sector by focusing on economic recovery. Some examples of our work include our support for chambers and associations, in which CIPE partners with business associations and chambers to ensure that they can provide essential resources to their members and voice the concerns and needs of the private sector to policymakers. CIPE partners have advocated for government support that can help businesses weather this trying period, such as tax relief and COVID-19 specific financial assistance. Additionally, the pandemic brought to the forefront the importance and opportunities presented by the digital economy, and simultaneously highlighted the challenges and digital divides that are present in many operating environments. To support businesses pivoting their businesses online, CIPE's global team has launched a free, interactive Technology for Democracy training course that is available on our website. This training covers key topics such as communications and social media, data privacy, and digital security. And finally, CIPE's Anti-Corruption and Governance Center conducted a COVID-19 and Corruption series, speaking with anti-corruption experts from around the world to identify windows of opportunity to increase transparency and limit the risk of corruption during the pandemic. These resources live on our Anti-Corruption Rapid Response website, which is an online community hub for anti-corruption activists and thought leaders. CIPE's work on economic recovery is also focused on the inclusion and equal participation of women in the economy, as economies can only truly recover when businesses owned and operated by women are also resilient in the face of such disruptions. This includes, but is not limited to, equal access to information and resources, equal opportunities to participate in market activities, and inclusion at decision-making tables. At CIPE, our Center for Women's Economic Empowerment, or CIWE as we call it, leads our efforts to support women seeking economic opportunity, from scaling up successful economic empowerment programs and piloting new program ideas, to leading gender mainstreaming and promoting our efforts in projects throughout our organization. CIWE recently conducted a global survey on the impact of the pandemic on women's business associations and women's entrepreneurs. And it learned that the most prevalent issues to women's businesses included financial challenges and business closures, which has led to a lack of customers and reduced working hours and earnings for staff. Our respondents detailed the need for filling knowledge gaps through technology training, knowledge sharing, networking and advocacy, and showed great interest in virtual business-related training sessions. And finally, they indicated that when addressing current gaps and needs faced by their chambers and associations, they considered financial support from the government and outside funding sources through subsidies, tax exemptions, and payment reductions essential to their survival. In PNG, we're already responding to some of these needs through our PNG Women's Business Resource Center. From its humble beginnings, the Resource Center has grown into a local institution that provides valued services and opportunities to PNG women as they participate in the local economy. The center continues to directly listen to women and their needs as they navigate new challenges, gathering data to inform decisions on how to position the WBRC for continued relevance to PNG women. Following the release of the first COVID-19 impact survey last year and the launch of related programmatic responses, this year's survey offers updated data and insights on the conditions faced by women entrepreneurs. Today, we look forward to sharing our insights, hearing those of local experts, and engaging in a meaningful conversation that contribute to a more gender-sensitive economic recovery in PNG. Thank you for your interest today, and I wish you a productive meeting.
Thank you, Andrew, for your remarks. I'm also excited to introduce today's speakers who are leaders within the PNG business community. First, we have Ms. Ellie Webb, our CIPE's PNG Country Director. Ellie joined CIPE as our Country Director in November 2015, assisting in rolling out a series of projects towards building a stronger entrepreneurial foundation for the PNG community and advocate for the development and change in women's economic empowerment. Ellie has a diverse range of professional and leadership experiences in public, private, and nonprofit sectors in both PNG and Australia on topics such as human services, family and sexual violence-induced trauma, sports, and media and music. Our second panelist today is Mr. John Pora, Chair of the PNG MSME Council and a business owner. John is an accomplished business development leader with over 25 years of experience working in over 14 provinces in PNG across 7 sectors of the value chain and recognized as one of the pioneers of e-commerce in PNG. He currently sits as Executive Director for Interactively Marketing IT, Director for Global Farming and Trading Limited, Director for Neogene PNG Limited, Founder and President of the PNG ICT SME Development Program, and in November 2020, joined the PNG Small to Medium Enterprise Corporation as chairman. So as you can see, he's very deeply connected into the PNG business community. Third, we also have Miss Annette Sete, who is director of Maku Gifts and also owner of Lava Girl brand. Annette is a woman entrepreneur from PNG with over 6 years of experience running businesses in media, sales and marketing, tourism, and fashion design. She is currently the director of Maku Gifts and owner of Lava Girl brand, as well as the Marketing Champ, which is a marketing consultancy that supports all marketing for these brands. She runs all her businesses from her home living in Kokopo, which includes managing 4 brick and mortar shops, an online shop, and a busy production unit, and over 50 staff. Finally, as you can probably notice today, we are also joined by Ms. Heidi Otiwani, who will be providing sign language interpretation throughout the event. Heidi is a certified national sign language interpreter, interpreting in both PNG and Melanesian Sign Language. She currently sits as the secretary for the PNG Deaf Association and works as an interpreter for the national news with the MBC. She also works to support and interpret for the PNG Deaf rugby team. Heidi also works with SIL to interpret talking books for children. And with her over 10 years of experience as an interpreter, Heidi really hopes to see more Papua New Guineans learning sign language, as it is the 4th national language of PNG. Now, since we've introduced our panelists, I'm just going to share a little bit about CIPE in Papua New Guinea. Andrew has touched on it, but we've been active in Papua New Guinea since 2013 with women's economic empowerment programs focused on entrepreneurship and advocacy, business advocacy. Our aim to strengthen the overall entrepreneurial ecosystem for women in PNG is really centered around the PNG Women's Business Resource Center, or the WBRC, whose doors we opened in November 2016. So actually this event coincides with our anniversary and marks us entering into our 6th year. The WBRC has grown over the past years, beginning with a few information sessions to having over 4,000 women benefiting from our programs. This growth was possible by listening to the needs of women, making sure the information, resources, and services offered were timely, accurate, and relevant. And this was the motivation behind our first COVID-19 survey last year. We wanted to take a moment to assess how women entrepreneurs were doing, and really understand what they needed most. And in the interest of time, I won't share the detailed findings of that report, but instead encourage you to look through that report, which is available on our website. Now, I'm sure many of you are looking forward to hearing this year's finding, which is why you're here. So Ellie, I'll turn it over to you to share our results.
Thank you so much, Jane. And good morning, Truolgeta, in my language, the Nevakrolwai, and good evening to those who are joining us from the US. Again, Jane, thank you so much for the warm welcome. Welcome to my fellow panelists, John and Annette, who I really look forward to hearing your insights in a short time. Welcome to the representatives from our generous donors from the Australian and the United States governments. Welcome to our partners in the development space and stakeholders here in PNG who we work alongside to combat the various societal impacts in PNG. And finally, a really huge warm welcome to our broader audience who have joined via our virtual platforms here and abroad. Thank you so much to everyone for allowing some of your, very busy schedule some time for us to share our findings. Echoing the sentiments of our CEO, Andrew, and my colleague, Jane, under the economic pressures of COVID-19, in particular, women entrepreneurs in PNG have faced dire threats to the survival of their businesses due to existing societal impacts, social impacts, and the complex challenges in setting up and growing their businesses. We're all well aware of the existing barriers faced, such as gender inequality, lack of finance, lack of access to finance and information, and of course, the poverty and illiteracy levels. We all thought 2020 was a struggle, and reflecting back, I've got to admit, I was really hopeful that we would see a light at the end of the tunnel of 2020 in terms of relief from the onslaught of COVID-19. However, mirroring the devastating global effects of COVID, Papua New Guinea's journey into 2021 has brought about some unprecedented challenges for the economic environment, with those being some of the worst hit in our SME and MSME community. We saw the collapse of the airline and travel industry, which of course had significant impacts on access to value chains and markets for our entrepreneurs across a variety of industries. Constant anxiety, regarding impending lockdowns, possible job loss, suggested increases in GBV levels, and introduction, what we found of existing, and higher mental health concerns, to add to the list of the already staggering endemics within our country. The digital space is no longer just for social interaction and has now become the norm for business practices, both globally and here in PNG. And whilst the government of PNG continues to work hard at increasing access to information and the very much needed financial assistance, this still remains a huge unanswered challenge as the economic domino effect is being felt by all. None more so than our women, and the feedback remains consistent that our MSMEs are still not getting the relief they so urgently require or feeling heard in their cries for assistance. A key priority in CIPE's programmatic strategy is to strengthen Indigenous voices for women in business reform and lowered barriers in some 80 countries. And CIPE is responding to the needs of these vulnerable women, entrepreneurs impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The published key findings and recommendations from last year's survey in 2020 resulted in the design of the CIPE business support programs to build business resiliency. And I encourage you to read this to understand the direction of our programmatic shift with the COVID lens and the justification behind those designs. But without too much further ado, let's get into the findings for the 2021 results on 144 women-owned and operated MSMEs. So findings are meant to add to the existing research, and understanding that is currently available and what is available to better provide that targeted assistance for women, PNG women entrepreneurs. CIPE's continuing efforts to better understand the circumstances, as well as focused efforts on how we can consistently build depth and breadth of our reach and footprint, even virtually, has resulted in no shortage of women SMEs for us to talk to. Next slide, please. So this year was another huge lift in the way of just over 700 phone conversations in the space of just under 4 weeks. Mind you, this was carried out by a really small team of 4 staff. Learning from last year's efforts forced us to become more specific in our narrative and learn about the importance of closed questions to garner the data we needed to ensure a clean result. A total of 25 questions were developed for individual interviews, participated by 144 women entrepreneurs via phone calls conducted between June and July. You'll probably wonder why I mentioned the figure of 700 phone conversations and we have 144. Because when we have these closed questions, often sometimes it's a lack of understanding as to what the questions may need to be, language barriers, literacy levels, and then of course the sheer fact that people may not necessarily want to share that information after they get into the nitty-gritty, because it can be quite an emotional toll on our participants when they have these conversations with us. Again, via a mixed methods survey made up of phone calls, email, social media interactions, we were able to extract some clear relevant data. Participants were selected from a sample of CIPE's database of program beneficiaries, including but not limited to our business accelerators, training workshops, networking events, and the advocacy component of our work, such as the Business Advocacy Network, or PNG-BAN, who are currently rolling out the Women's Business Agenda. Getting into the survey demographics, the majority of interviews were conducted over the phone, with a small number via email and our social media platforms, to ensure that a diverse participant pool could be reached and to maintain, of course, social distancing within the new norm. Whilst capturing the experiences of businesswomen and their strength or will or resilience in response to COVID-19, it's so imperative that we canvass both education levels and individual business information. This year, we knew that 7.6% have some or no secondary school education. Just over a third completed university or higher. 76.9% have a business location in Port Moresby, and this doesn't mean that our respondents are Port Moresby centric. We had a number of respondents that actually had businesses located in several provinces. 66.7% of businesses are registered versus 33.3% of businesses being unregistered. Again, please reminding you that this is around our respondents. We're all aware about the numbers for the unregistered business in that informal sector being in excess of 80%, but this is just looking at our respondents. 20.8% operate in specialised services. So looking at consulting, real estate, education, finance, and telecommunications. We have just over half that identified as startups, which was very exciting to see. So in light of, the struggling sort of situation and challenging environment, people are still intent on getting into that entrepreneurial space and being brave, whilst 17% self-identify as having been established. And we have just over 3/4 that operate with less than 5 employees. But the real kicker for me is always just over 40%. So 42.7% earned less than 12,000 kina per year. We're talking about just under 5,000 Australian dollars to support entire families. When we move on to a snapshot of the surveyed businesses, as noted above, 2/3 of the respondents stated they were registered. We had just over 3/4 having less than 5 employees, and that figure of the 42.7% advising they have less than 12,000 kina in turnover. This, we're looking at these businesses supporting overheads, staff, their families on less than 5,000 AUD per annum, and still trying to find ways to scale and grow whilst juggling the external pressures I described earlier. A micro enterprise, just as a matter of note, in PNG is defined as any business activity or enterprise with an annual sales turnover of less than 200,000 and an employment size with less than 5 people. Using this definition, nearly half of the registered businesses included in this survey are actually micro enterprises. When we talk about the general impact of COVID-19 on business, next slide, please. 71.4% experienced significant problems, 5.4% temporarily halted, and 23.1% reported positive impact or no impact at all. And you might have heard or felt the smile in my voice when I was reading that figure. So whilst we as in the world expected this, PNG was no different. It was encouraging to see that just under a quarter of our respondents reported that positive movement, certainly an improvement from the 2 to 3% that we had reported on in 2020. When we then look at the specific impact of COVID-19 on businesses, larger formal or registered businesses were struggling at higher rates than their smaller informal business counterparts. So specific impact of COVID-19 on businesses, respondents dealt with the impact of COVID-19 in a variety of ways, often utilising multiple measures to remain afloat. We know that 80.6% saw a reduction in revenue, 51.4% respondents reported reduced hours. We had reduced operational costs. Similarly, businesses also suffered in a variety of ways. So whilst those are staying afloat, the suffering is equally impactful. Reduced wages, reduced revenue, reduced hours, reduced operating cost, as outlined on the graph to my left. Again, encouraging though, but just to see that just under 20% actually reported new business opportunities and 5.6% logged increased sales. There is a light at the end of the tunnel that's nearing perhaps. Moving on to other notable factors, the industries that we look at, we had sector significant problems, but it was actually felt across all of the industries. A quarter of the businesses surveyed in retail, specialised services, and food or hospitality industries actually saw a positive impact. In relation to business size, women who run businesses with more employees tended to feel the negative effects stronger compared to those with less than 5 employees. And this is logical, given that they're likely to be registered, they're likely to have more overheads, things like superannuation requirements, governance, associated costs and so forth, and just having a larger HR pool. Moving on to education level, the higher education levels did not appear to be correlated with whether a business would experience significant problems or otherwise. But, this point is interesting because last year we found that those with lower literacy levels, or perhaps better to say less business acumen, also exhibit a reduced ability, or coping mechanisms to cope with the pressures, have not maybe been aware of what these coping mechanisms might be or where the resources are to help them push through. This isn't to say that it isn't still a factor, as we remind ourselves this shift could just merely be attributed to the selection of respondents who participated in the survey. The registration status, so women whose businesses are formally registered with the IRC and IPA, have experienced more hardship compared to women whose businesses are unregistered. So we know that women entrepreneurs with lower education levels were more likely to operate unregistered businesses and have their businesses disproportionately impacted, resulting in more closures. But the overall levels reported in hardship makes sense for a registered entity. Again, as mentioned in the previous slide, they're likely to have more overheads, site rentals, super costs, costs associated with any of the governance measures for insurances, due diligence you have to take with, legal liabilities and so forth. And those that are unregistered are quite likely to be operating from home. And again, not minimising the impact that this population may have experienced, but the existing overheads or lack thereof would possibly have reduced, the negative impact of hardship should those closures eventuate in the unregistered businesses. Location of business, so more people outside of Port Moresby experienced a reduction in wages. Among those who did not see a reduction in wages, only 19.5% were outside the capital, even though they comprised 23.8% of the total respondents. Again, this is understandable that given to date, a lot of the resources for business recovery and or resilience still remain Port Moresby centric. And so this is something that we at CIPE are inherently aware of, and I'm sure all of our other partners and stakeholders are also, to look to improve this space and ensure that we start, making sure that that footprint and reach for resources for business resilience and recovery is available nationwide. When we were looking at an awareness of an economic recovery plan, like it sounds so positive, right? Everybody was excited every time there was going to be something put in place that was going to help bail people out. And we're not talking about cash handouts, but mechanisms that businesses could apply to give them a little bit of relief. In this particular section, 38.9% of respondents indicated that there was no national plan for economic recovery. And 47.9% noted they didn't even know a plan existed. I mentioned during last year's survey results, and again earlier today in my introduction, that our government in PNG widely publicised the introduction of relief programs to revitalise the economy. It was around being inclusive of the needs and the demands of that SME space and MSME space, in particular the informal economy, which we all know employ over 80% of PNG adults and is the source of income for 90% of households. But you can see the 97.9% stated they had not accessed any financial assistance versus a very low 2.1% who had. There's a variety of reasons for the no's that you can see. 39% actually had no idea. 36.2% didn't know how to access, and 15.6% did try, but they were found to be ineligible. So the question remains is, why is it still so hard to find information that is supposed to be for public consumption, particularly for the times that we're living in, when our people are so thirsty for knowledge and the access to the how-tos? And why is it such a high number of SMEs who are not bankable? Yet another challenge for us to answer. And us is encompassing everybody, public and private sector, and the development sector. If we're going to talk about the confidence in survival of business, and this is one thing that's key to our work in PNG with regards to the empowerment that we're trying to push through, but confidence can be a little bit different again. So we had just over 30% stated a decrease in confidence. Just over a quarter were neither here nor there. They had no change in their confidence level. But it was so good to hear the strong resolve shining through in our conversations, with over 40% stating they were feeling a definite increase in confidence, so it isn't all doom and gloom. The urgent needs among the PNG women entrepreneurs, 80.6% are struggling. They need some access to finances or learning how to get themselves more bankable so they can access those financial mechanisms. 57.6% need access to markets. The 50.7% are aftering business skills. 45.8% just want information. Our entire country is constantly hungry, and thirsty for that knowledge and information and where to find it. 45.8% requested further business coaching, where we're looking at deeper dives into how to actually, recover your business or become more efficient in the way you're running your business. And 17.4% exhibited needs to help in that mental health space. These issues are not new, and they are areas CIPE and all our partners and stakeholders are very well aware of. But we really need to step things up and take deeper dives into how to combat and design programs that really hit the mark to reduce these figures. Our significant correlations, when we look at some support information for women who reduced operating costs, wages, hours of operation, were more likely to identify the urgent need for that support information. Business coaching was looking at women who reduced critical business operations, including, again, reduction of operating costs and business hours. They're more likely going to be the businesses that want and need that coaching support. And coaching is different from mentoring, as I'm sure you're all aware. Business skills are factors that were correlated with the urgent need for skills training, including business industry and the COVID-19 impact of reduced operating hours. So just being really aware, but building up that business acumen. COVID is incredibly tough to manage through, but it's not the first, huge challenge that the globe has seen, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Financial support is looking at the majority of dwellers in NCD and those outside NCD, stating that they urgently need financial support. Those in the capital had higher likelihood of not needing the finance than those outside of the capital. And then finally, with mental health and wellbeing, of the 17.7 respondents who did express urgent need for this support in this space, 84% of that figure were either owners or operators of startups, while no respondents were from established and growing and emerging businesses. So perhaps, I guess, a little bit of strength around being resilient when you're entering into that risky and brave space of being an entrepreneur. The signs of economic recovery, when we look at the figures that I shared earlier, in a positive light, we saw 23.1% of women entrepreneurs surveyed noted positive or no impact to their business, which was a higher percentage than expected. 5.6% noted increased sales. Again, I'm sure you can hear my smile when it comes through. And 18.8% noted new business opportunities, indicating a high likelihood that businesswomen are relying on their own innovation and resources, given that most of our respondents were not even aware of that economic recovery plan. So in closing, as I mentioned when I first started, findings are meant to add to the existing research. We need to understand what's currently available, and we need to provide that targeted assistance for women entrepreneurs. Hear those cries and make sure that our action steps are very specific and intentional. CIPE's continuing efforts to better understand these circumstances of our women entrepreneurs in PNG are meant to ensure that these support programs and policy development lead to inclusive growth and a more prosperous PNG. So later in the session, we'll share just how we responded in our actions to last year's asks and perhaps some thought around what is next. But thank you again so much for your attention, and I'll hand you back over to Jane.
Thanks, Ellie. Now that we shared these results, there was a lot there. I am going to turn to our panelists because I'm sure many of us are keen to hear their thoughts. But I do want to take a moment to encourage everyone to utilize the Q&A box if you have any questions for Ellie or any of the panelists throughout the event. So John, economic recovery has been the main priority all over the world. In a lot of conversations, economic recovery is focused on business resiliency or the ability of a business to quickly adapt to disruptions. But we know that economic recovery goes beyond just the role of businesses and requires coordinated efforts across stakeholders, including the government. Now, given your background engaging in policy discussions with decision makers, could you share how the private sector, especially MSMEs, have been able to coordinate and advocate for their needs to the government? How have these conversations gone, and what are some of the areas you feel will require additional efforts moving forward? And since today, I know there's a lot of questions, but I have a couple more actually. If you could touch on this, it'd be great. Since we're talking today specifically about women entrepreneurs, I would love if you could share also how the MSME Council has prioritized the needs of women entrepreneurs and those in the informal economy during these conversations. John, I think we might be having a little bit of a sound. Can we try one more time? I think that's a little bit better. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Bit better? Okay, all right, great. Yeah, so I don't want to overload the conversation today. I'll give 3 key areas and outline that, as well as some detail in between that. So coming into the pandemic, of course, there's a lot of work to do in government. I represent the SME Corporation. We came in December the 20th, 2020, which was pretty much after 2019's first experience to a pandemic and all the uncertainties of it. So I'm going to give you some information from 2019 that I did collect prior to pandemic, at which I will be collecting some data in the beginning of next year to see what this 3-year window of time looks like in terms of the impact. But PNG itself, when I look at the bigger picture of it, from 1997, we were just under a 10 billion kina economy. By 2019, we'd expanded to 78 billion economy. Now, what happens in the growth spurt and phase such as this is that the governance structures across the board in all stakeholders expands at a rapid pace. What I have seen in the machinery of government, as I've been in there in the last 10 months, is a big disconnect that's within the systems, where the left hand and the right hand does not know what it's doing. And what that does, in essence, is that the customer citizen experience then in the field of business is so challenging. Who do I go to? I go here, I get sent here. It takes 4 months to get anything done in regulatory or compliance areas. It's just a lot of time consumed, and I think that's one of the depression related aspects to why people don't get into business, is that it's very difficult. So in stating that we're aware now, as a corporation, it's our duty to go back to our ministries, to go back to our government, to go back to our Prime Minister and bring solutions to the table. So let me take you also through what that will look like. We're looking at the SME Corporation, we're looking at the government-to-government relationships. We're looking at the government-to-agency relationships that are out there. We're looking at the government-to-business relationships. You'll have heard about the reserve list. I'm happy to state that will come to the floor of Parliament. That is on the notice of papers in Parliament to come in the opening sessions of next year. It was tabled. It was focused on the cottage industry. What we're trying to do is expand our dimension of thinking. So the Prime Minister did send it back, and we're looking not just at the cottage industry, we're looking beyond the cottage industry to see how we can actually increase the inclusivity of Papua New Guineans getting into business across our value chain through the various supply chain systems that are available. From that, the next mechanisms will be, how do we get our government-to-government institutions to then come together and create an environment better for citizens that can work, whether it be vending to our national procurement commissions for major projects to the values of 10 million. How do we get the vending processes done? How do we get our compliance levels up? How do we get our regulatory criteria met? And really bring the customer service experience or citizen service experience to another level. So that's what we're tasked to take to our ministry and our prime ministers, the solutions on that context. And then also to look at the active engagement between government to business. How often are we meeting with each other? Have we given you a facility? Do we have a facility where we should be coming together a lot more regularly? And then how are we nurturing the business-to-business relationships that are out there? What levels of support that have we got? In terms of our B2C fields, we have our Consumer Affairs Council or that does price regulation, but we've also got to look at service regulation and standards and things across the board in terms of how we're treating each other in the marketplace in service itself. And of course, one of the other areas that I'm looking at now is the consumer-to-consumer activation that's in the market. A lot of that is informal right now. There's also a lot of trade occurring on social media, and there is a lot of theft and stolen goods also on social media. So these are some of the challenges that we've looked at in terms of what's happening in the market. The growth that we've had. And then, of course, we come to, as of 2019, in December, we closed the year with 149,936 registered business names in our registry. And then we had, at the close of 2019, 63,433 registered companies. At the business group level, we had 5,821 registered business groups, and at our association, non-profits, NGOs, we had 8,588 in country. Our population statistics at the end, estimated in 2010, was a population of 15% in the formal employment sector, of which within that 15%, 47.38 was our unemployment or our employed rate. So we were still 43% unemployed of a 15% percentage of our overall population. So that shows us that there's a lot of the informal sector that is out there. That's where the real growth is. However, what we've also got to do is ensure that for the population that is in business, and just look at the figures here quickly, in estimates only, you're looking at 100, 200,000, 212, about 225,000 operating formal organizations in country through our registry. So in a population of 10 million, that's really not that big. There's so much room for growth in this space. However, we've got to define what that looks like. So as I look to 2022, I'll be having a look at the figures as to what our register shows then. I've also tried to get the data to be broken down into a better demographic viewpoint so that we can identify what age categories people are in, pretty much what Ellie's report identified, some of those key statistics and figures by demographic status levels, at which we can then give that to our ministry, our prime ministers, the government, and we can go to the table also with some solutions and programs going forward. So we have a lot of work to do. As I said, the growth, there's two key things here that I see in terms of where Papua New Guinea is. The growth between 1997 and 2019 was almost 700% in our economy growth itself. A lot of that was the extractive sector, so our value chain is heavily weighed on one sector. Although there were growth experiences across in our logistics, our distribution, when life's good, there's a euphoria, people spend money. There was expansion across the value chain. And I think from the figures that I've seen in your reports here, the retail sector growth to 37% is an indication for me that sector of the value chain is also ignited. And I've seen a lot of trading occurring of different products as we open up to a world of free trade and accessibility and direct ordering and things like that. So the next challenge, of course, is a pandemic, something that we've never experienced before. We really didn't have a reference point in the country as to what something like this does. While we have had economic collapses in the past, I think the most predominant one that comes to mind is when we lost BCL, which represented a very high level of the GDP of the country. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, the economic impact of that was quite huge for the country. Resulted in a lot of taxation increases in the balancing of books in order to sustain. This pandemic, however, is different because of the fact that there's a continuous level of uncertainty that's been running for 2019, 2020, 2021, and we're still going into 2022 with a level of uncertainty as to what things will look like. And I think Ellie mentioned in there was the emergence of the digital economy that's coming through. That's going to solve part of a problem. However, it's not going to impact a greater sphere that we'd like, purely because our knowledge economy is small. In terms of some of the key points, which I'll explain going forward. So as we look at the pandemic, we've gone through a shock. Our supply chains have collapsed. I know we have issues down at our wharf in terms of fee charges and things like that, because ships are stuck out, in lanes waiting to come in. There's people not turning up to work. Time costs money. Charges are being done. So we're looking to address that in government as to how we can assist SMEs in the country with the supply chain issues that they're facing. And the costs that would normally be charged, maybe they should be waived in a period like this, especially for people who have to pay for something that's just sitting doing nothing in a bond yard. So we're looking at things like that. The lessons, there's definite lessons coming through from this pandemic. One of the key lessons is that we are in a situation of growth where there's so many gaps within our structure, our governance structures overall. And we're going to need to fix that. Coming out of the pandemic, at the SME Corporation, we've commenced the Road to 50, which is a mission. It's a mission for 4 years. It's aligned to the 50th anniversary of Papua New Guinea's sovereignty and self-governance in 4 years' time, and there's a deadline of time. So we've given ourselves 4 years to be able to go to government to say, this is the direction we're going to go. This is the relationship between government and citizens that we want to create. And this is the level of and standard of communication we're going to need to achieve it. So a few of the key ingredients that we see is going to be critical going forward is, one, the re-engaging of our structures right across the board, from our regulatory compliance, our relationships between government to government, our relationships between government to business and business to business. So all the relationships that need to be connected and rebuilt, we're going to look at how we can foster this so that people are not on their own, that your business is actually part of a supply chain. Your business is actually part of a bigger picture in the economy of the country, and you're not alone. So you need to connect with people, and you need to make relationships the key to coming out of this pandemic.
John, that sounds like you guys have a full agenda and so many things that you're working on. I think out of all the things that you said, I'm sure many of the businesses, when you said improved customer service from government agencies through better coordination, I think, you know, there was music going off in my head. That sounds like something that would absolutely help other businesses get into, other people that wanting to get into business more smoothly transition in. And so it sounds like you guys have a lot to work on there. But at this time, I actually want to hear from Annette, because as a businesswoman, I'm sure she's got a lot of reactions to some of the things that you shared, John, as well as some of the findings that we've shared.
Yep, if I could just close off on three key things.
1 minute, in 1 minute, yes.
1 minute, you got it. So the relationship between government and citizen, yes, government, we have to accept and acknowledge our own failures. What we've also got to do is ask our citizens to step up. And I'm going to be asking our citizens to step up and asking the government to position ourselves in communication where economic discipline culturing becomes a service that we and a development agenda item, that we actually build the economic discipline culture, because right now we think money falls from the sky. Money is relative. The more you have, the more relatives are at your house, things along those lines that have been cultured over the first 46 years. The second thing, as Ellie mentioned, is business acumen. We need to understand where we fit in the economy, that when you're in business, you're actually not alone. You are part of a supply chain, which is part of a sector, which is part of the greater governance structure. And if you're only doing it for money, then you will be alone. But if you're doing it as part of the greater picture of the economy, then you need to start building relationships, and you will realize that you are not alone. And business acumen is going to play a vital role in that. The next thing, of course, to complement all of that is the financial literacy done in context and through content. The context and the content is going to be critical going forward as we come out of it. And as we come out of the pandemic, I think we can take a position where, do we want to survive or do we want to thrive? We're positioning to say, let's thrive out of this pandemic. You don't crash for nothing. You crash, and when we go through all events and catastrophes and disasters of time, there's always new shoots that come up. There's always new life that begins. That's what we want to look forward to and say, okay, let's identify where the new life is. Let's thrive coming out of this. So that's where the corporation's going. We do have programs for women in business coming through. We're looking at how the free enterprise market is working in this unstructured manner. And we're looking at programs to say, look, we're actually going to do structured programs with specific players that meet the development agendas of economic discipline and business acumen. So Our citizens can look forward to women in business, youth in business, and home-based business as 3 criteria, as well as life after public service. We're looking at bringing that into play 2022 and beyond.
Thank you, John. So at this time, John, you shared a lot. I'm going to turn to Annette. Annette, are you there? I do have a question for you. It's a 2-part question, given that you are in the thick of business in your community. I'd like you to share your reflections on the impact of COVID on women entrepreneurs, especially as it relates to women who are outside of NCD. I'm curious to know how you found the report and the findings that we shared and its relevance to the experiences of your community. And how have you seen women respond and adapt to keep their businesses going? And then secondly, sometimes we see that the issue, it lies because the support doesn't exist. But other times we know that the issue actually is the access, right? That accessing finance, accessing markets, that's really truly the problem. And so, in some instances, financial assistance, we find that the eligibility requirements are much too high or strict and rigid, as mentioned by some women in our survey. So how might we improve the access component based on your experiences?
Okay, hi Jane. So let's hope my connection doesn't go off. Firstly, the report is great. There were a lot of issues that I faced in my business that I think the other women as well faced in their businesses, and that was highlighted in Ellie's report. One of the, I think for my business, we were a little bit lucky in that we had products coming just before the initial lockdown. We had products on the water when the initial lockdown happened. So we had products come in and we were able to sell. So the positives were that we were able to take on a lot more people that got dropped off in other businesses. So we had in total about 43 that joined us since March 2019. We also had 3 shops opened, 2 in Port Moresby and 1 back home in Kokopo, that is. We were also able to get some sort of funding from the government under the relief funds. Although the rates that the banks were advertising were not the exact figures. Like, for example, BSP said that the interest rate was at 14%. When you look at all the figures, it added up at 28% after you have taken out the loan. So that's one example. A lot of the other agencies or businesses were riding on the line of helping SMEs, so MSMEs. There is a lot of brand washing, if you like. Say, for instance, they say come for SME loans. All of the fees and everything else in the financial institutions are just the same as any other loans you're taking out. So there is no specific desk for SMEs. There is no specific rates for SMEs or fees. It was all just the same as any other loans you would have taken out. So I'm just highlighting a few of the examples there. In my business, in the line of fashion and clothing and designs and local motifs and all of that, there was a number of new players or active players that got into that space, which was reserved for Papua New Guineans. So if you like, there was an increase in players in the reserved business space. There was this overall uncertainty with COVID-19 that just affected all other plans as well. For example, we had to adjust closing hours, we had to adjust number of staff, working hours, things like that. So all relating to COVID impact. The other thing that we faced as a business that really affected us was the supply chain issues. So one of the main things that we find was the availability of foreign currency to purchase overseas. So we're looking at trying to increase our local purchase to try and create products in country. So we're not relying too much on imports. Yeah, there were, and I'm just kind of just speaking generally on different issues there, but overall we had a number of positives and big positive, especially us moving into Port Moresby since we were Kokopo based and having to open 2 shops in Moresby, months within each other, and our kind of branching out to the other regions as well, like in Mount Hagen, Goroka, and Ley. So there's been a lot of positives as well.
That's great to hear, Annette. I mean, you shared a lot about your personal experience. I'm really happy to hear that there were some positives. I think it's exciting that you guys were able to open new new offices and new branches of your business in different parts of PNG. I'm curious if you could share, not just your own experience, but also the things that you're hearing of other women in your community in terms of accessing some of the resources that are available.
Yeah, so in terms of accessing finance, so I'll come back to a bank loan. If you look at the bank forms and especially BSP, because I bank with them, a lot of the women-run businesses still have to provide a guarantee in a husband or a male figure. So that also have an impact on how do you run your own business, but then you have, you still have to include your husband in those forms. I think it's NDB and BSP still require a husband in there. Also the knowledge of how to get finance. In the SME space, there's a lot of women that need a little bit of assistance in terms of how do you get funding. So that I see a lot of other fellow women in business that are having issues with putting together their papers or forms to access finance. The other issue that a lot of us are discussing is how do you scale up? Now that you've started selling and you're getting your products right and you have this market, how do you then grow or move or scale up in terms of product, customer base, things like that? So there is a lot of need in terms of business literature, if you like, and something that is very targeted to, say, businesses in the level that need that sort of assistance. A lot of the help that is put out is very generic and it lumps all SMEs and SMEs together. When you look at the IRC's small business text that was part of the relief package, it was aimed at very small businesses that it's not helping the ones that are trying to grow. Put it this way, the small business tax was really aimed at a level that has a very high frequency of not surviving after the first 5 years. So it wasn't helping businesses in my level, if you like, to at least minimize our tax payments, at least for the first 5 years or 6 years of our businesses. So how John spoke about, there was gaps in there was mismatch of certain government help to businesses. I think the small tax is one of those things that is not really aligned with growing certain businesses that are in that space to grow. Those are the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is why, having this kind of data that we've gathered through our survey is really helpful because it helps us to understand in more detail how we can target, right? Based on whether you're up at the startup phase, or you're more established. And we're finding that there are specific needs based on where you are in your business kind of maturity, if you will. And so I think what you raise is a really great point. And I might invite John and Ellie, if you guys want to just quickly comment on each other very briefly.
I don't mind going. Oh, sorry, John. Did you want to go
Ladies
ahead?
first, Ellie. No, ladies
Oh,
first.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's the right answer. So it's really good to hear from Annette's point of view, because she's been the MSME and has grown, and I'm keen to see if, when we talk about people not being heard, like this is stuff that everybody keeps saying, but for whatever reason, the development, it's not so much the development partners, but the actual people that are in the decision-making roles. Like we're getting better at designing these programs, but we really, really need that consultation from private sector, and have a what's the word? A collaborative approach, but trying to achieve the same outcomes instead of, for want of not sounding, diminishing it, but not ticking a box, right? Not saying we're going to serve 100 women, but get really intentional about how's it going to work for somebody in Jawaka, and how's it going to work for someone in Manus, and spend the money and the time and the effort that goes into designing this. But in saying what you were commenting on, John, with regards to the growth, like everybody knows there's been growth, but that was, hearing some of those figures and the shift is quite incredible. And so it's really exciting to hear that, with the SME core, but as well as government, that these conversations are happening, and we're starting to see some movement. But we need to accelerate that movement in some way or form. And is it the case where government needs to look at things that have happened previously and accelerate that, leverage off what's already going on instead of trying to reinvent the wheel? It's a great time at the moment. Elections are just around the corner. So, I guess we want to try and see if there's new initiatives that can be put in place. But, it's so obvious at the moment with the public outcry and essentially what's happening at the moment with all these rights and protests and so forth. And that's just down to a lack of awareness, a lack of information, lack of education, around what's going on around them. And this is what happens in this SME space. People just don't know. If they don't know how to get the finance, but they don't know how to make themselves more bankable, how to make themselves more creditable to the financiers so that they're going to be taken on. And what you said, and it is so true around the products are being designed, it's getting better, but sometimes they're, is it a duplicate of existing products, but it's just got a new title? I don't know. I'm not in the banking and finance industry. That's a bit of a general overview, but the good thing is there's positive shifts, there's positive steps. I think if COVID had hit sort of 12 years ago, we would have been in some real strife. So, the time is right. But yeah, that's all I've got to comment on at the moment.
Yeah, I think I'll just comment what Anna said there about every business and business model is different and at a different point in time. What we are doing at the moment is a blanket coverage. There is I've had a number of conversations also just on the financial literacy and the training aspects of it, and the need for our communication to be clarified a lot better. One of the realities is when you're going to a financial institution, they're not interested in a certificate. So what we have to do is culture our people towards the ability to present a financial statement, because that's what gets you access to finance, not a certificate. So we've got to really clarify in our marketplace and to our citizens what business is. We had been cultured for the first 46 years and pre-independence that the path that we were to take was in education was to fulfill the employment space at the end of that. However, business is very different. And so what I encourage a lot of Papua New Guineans to do now, and women in business, is you've now got one of the prime opportunities that we didn't have, say, 15 years ago in access to information. Use technology to your advantage. Don't just use it for the gossip of what's happening around and the whinging and the whining and all the things that are occurring. That's always going to be there. I guarantee you in the next 3 years, there's going to be a new conversation tomorrow about something to complain about, and the following day, there'll be another one, and the following day. So within the voice, all the noise that's around, you find the voice of reason. And the voice of reason is, what do you need right now? What do you need to know right now? And access information to that, at which point, now, as citizens, we're going to, and business owners, we're going to need to portray this demand-driven ideology back to government, that it is a demand-driven system now. We're not just in a supply-driven environment. Whereas before we would do what we were told. The economy has grown now. The creativity is available in the marketplace. The supply chains, the ability to link with people. You know, the key thing I'll always say is always remember in business that if you're doing it for money, you're doing it alone. But if you're going to do it to contribute to the bigger picture of building a country, then you're not alone. There is a supply chain system that is behind our value chain in the country. And learn and understand that so that you build the correct relationships. The most successful people in business have always been the people who have built networks related to whether it's finance, build a team within finance. There are multiple layers of finance. As Annette was saying, you know, there's a period of time where you do the hard yards and literally your business is your job. It pays your bills, but there's a certain point in time that you do want to expand, where your asset actually starts to look after you as opposed to you working for your asset, you know, and that's a different frame of knowledge that is required at that point in time. So it really is in the SME space a demand-driven field, because your development is not going to be the same as everybody else. Your circumstance and your environment in which you operate is not going to be like every other area. Everyone keeps saying to me, oh, we're coming to Port Moresby because that's where the opportunity is. And what that says to me is that we need to expand the government's governance structures out into other provinces to ensure that service is available in those fields and also targeted. For example, there's no point in me talking about fish in the highlands, you know, on a large scale. I need to be talking about gardening. Everything that moves into that dimension needs to be relevant to the environment, you know, from knowledge to practices to engagements to synergies. All of these need to be harnessed for that area. You know, if we go to the islands, we then look at the context of that area. You know, so there's a number of things that we're talking through in government at the moment. We've got policies coming through that, you know, and one of the statements have made in our board, have made at our management level, and will be making to government, is that you need to keep SME development on a constant evolution process. So expect that we will be coming through and saying we want another reform in a year or 2 years' time. You know, we're running on existing legislations that were written in 1974 and passed through. We need to evolve these things now because the market has changed. The citizen has changed. The Papua New Guinean today is not the Papua New Guinean that was 20, 30 years ago. You know, that evolution has already occurred. So as an institution, we need to also move forward in that dimension and open up opportunities. We're also looking at the abilities of international supply chains, the roles of our Department of Foreign Affairs, bilateral agreements, to look at avenues in which we can actually connect the international trade for our local produce so that we start exporting from here for our local developers. You know, and we have bilateral agreements that enable that. However, if we're not telling our citizens it's possible, they will always work in a small dimension of thinking, you know, and we're looking at what to do and how to bring the government together and say, look, let's open up the doors a bit more. Let's get information out there. Let's connect a bit more, and let's try and work in line with where citizens are, as opposed to giving a constant blanket approach.
Thanks, John.
This idea has to evolve now.
I'm just going to jump in here, and I see Ellie has her hand raised, so I'll turn it over to you, Ellie.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to ask, this is directed at John, and then I'd be really keen to see what Annette feels about this. So similar in terms of the political space where the government and the country itself is looking at options around temporary special measures to have a gender lens focus on getting women in more of a decision-making capacity, or, you know, on the floor of parliament, essentially. What's the likelihood of having conversations around having a gender lens to have a, you know, a set percentage, so that when you're looking at tendering or procurement processes and so forth, there needs to be a set, you know, a set level that must be given. And I don't know whether my counterparts will agree with me on this, but essentially, I almost feel like it needs the same shift, where if we're going to push more women to be participating in the formal economy, we need to give them an opportunity to actually get their foot in the door, to be part of that tendering process, so they can access that value chain and supply chains here. And so, you know, again, well, one, there's a couple of things. There's not enough stats. Like, we're doing this particular survey, to my knowledge, there's a couple of others of the implementing partners that do things with the markets and the tourism and so forth. But essentially across the board, to get an idea of how many women actually have access to these tendering opportunities through government. And then, of course, through private sector, because they go hand in hand. If private sector shifts, then government follows, or vice versa. So similarly, in the way that we're trying to approach our decay gate, basically, of the gender inequity in political arenas, why wouldn't we have the same approach towards the economic environment in Papua New Guinea, where we've got a gender lens and a really inherent focus on ensuring that when we're putting out tenders there to say, right, we've got, and this is encouraging SMEs to get into that supply chain where they're actually being able to access, you know, business and so forth through the government. But how do we get that happening where we're going to be able to have it set in place? I know legislation is difficult and it's time consuming, and, you know, to manage expectations, it's not something that can be put on the floor of parliament and it's turned around in 6 months. But I feel there needs to be some thought process around that, a real gender lens focus on making sure that we're building women SMEs. We are 51% of the population. We're over 50% in the informal economy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, Ellie, one way we can look at that is at the governance level, at the ministerial level, the legislative level. It's a citizen orientated legislation. When we come down to the next level of our structures, which is our actual government agencies, our government departments and divisions, as well as the government to business relationships in all the associations and you know, business bodies that are out there, the chambers of commerce, the SME corporations. I see no reason why at that level we cannot put the narrative as well as the policies and procedures in place to implement what you're talking about. I think at the government level, you know, if it came down, worst case scenario is that we can actually go up and say, can we put this? But you're going to have a challenge up in government, because the government has to look after all citizens. Coming down the structure is where we can actually implement that. As we go through the different departments, we go through the national procurement processes, the institutions related to that, the support and the shift can actually be directed on a percentage level and put through in policy and procedure, because that's a functional aspect of the total delivery. Does that make sense?
It does. It just, I don't know whether you're talking around the point, because I know I feel I can say that, but, you know, it'd be really nice to have some definitive answers to say, yep, that's an idea, let's take it. And it's frustrating for me that we have to have these platforms to raise this, because I would love, I would imagine that there would be a large population that would be feeling the same. It's frustrating, and it's almost suffocating and choking for women SMEs when they're getting in there. They know that there's these opportunities there. The inherent barriers that exist for women. But if we're going to do that for the political space, you know, it would be a great opportunity to look at transitioning that kind of approach in the economic space. Annette, what did you understand what I was getting at? And I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's interesting conversation. I don't think that there is more focus on this particular discussion. I think the focus was more on getting SMEs into a more formal arrangement, and get into all of those tender and all the applications. I don't think the conversation is more on gender at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see. I think because I am in a space where it's female focus, I think, in fashion and textile and all that. So I'm not really getting into that sort of conversation, but I know that there are other women in, say, timber or other things that may have discussed that sort of discussion, not so much in the space I'm at, but it'll be a great conversation to start having, I think, and I think in your space, you'd be the right person to kind of start these conversations and discussions with the other SMEs.
Sure, yeah. I'm sure John's shaking his head thinking, please don't call me for coffee to talk about this, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, for us.
Quite the opposite, Ellie. What you can do is send an email directly on that topic and the direction for it to go. At the SME Corporation, what I have to do is I've got to provide a gateway for the public, the private sector to move into the public sector, to be able to put things on the table as well. So within the corporation, we are going to create working groups 2022 onwards. If this needs to be one of the working groups, then let's get the bodies together. Let's bring the private and the public together and drive some of these narratives through and these agendas through. If we can do it at the policy levels or procedure levels, even at a policy level, then the legislation we don't need to go to, because we're already implementing it within the governance structure. And the legislation can maintain its overall viewpoint of all citizens in country in that context. But the machinery does allow for us to do that. Send the email through. If we need to create a working group for it, let's get it activated. Let's start in 2022. And in the mission that we have of the Road to 50, what I'd love to see is that in a 4-year space, the change does occur. So that we don't have to have this discussion again in 5 years' time. We don't have to continue the same narratives that we've done for many years over 20 years of economics growth and business participation. Is that we actually try and get things across the board. We give ourselves a deadline, we table it, we action it, and then we assess it following that as well.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We do have a couple of things to get through, but I've got one final question from the public. It's a question for John. It says here 80 to 85% is informal economy, and of these 80% are women and families. So I'll repeat that again for the public. 80 to 85% is informal economy, and of this particular figure, 80% of that is occupied by women and families. So targeted initiatives aimed at the majority of the informal sector economy is good economic decision making. Is it good economic decision making, I guess, is what the question is. Michelle, is that what you were aiming for?
I think maybe based on, John, what you were sharing about the working groups, it sounds like in addition to addressing specific needs of women entrepreneurs as a working group, perhaps the whole informal economy, having a working group focused on that might be another excellent way for us to continue to incorporate those issues into the overall agenda that the MSME Council is working on.
But in that space, I think in terms of the panel discussion, we're conscious of time, and we did want to spend a couple of minutes talking through how we responded to the 2020 survey to basically put our money where our mouths were from last year's findings. And, we were talking about what particular action steps did we put in place. And so you'll see on the screen, we came up with a number of ideas, and they were just ideas entering into COVID last year. We ran the survey last year, had the findings, the recommendations. So one of the first ones was business advisory coaching. Now, this was an opportunity for women-owned and operated SME businesses to access high-level deep dives into their business, and it was delivered by one of our partners in the industry experts, the Difference Incubator, and very generously supported by the Australian government. In a moment, we'll show one or two testimonials from that because that's been running throughout all of 2021 so far. And to date, there's been over 100 women that have been in receipt of this business coaching. We also introduced a lot more virtual trainings so that women can access at home, in their offices, or at the WBRC. Obviously, doors have been closed and then they're open and they're closed with the new Plapasin, but it meant that we were forced to push into that digital space and ensure that there was some high quality content that was available, and taking into account the differing literacy levels, connectivity issues, partnering with the likes of Newnet PNG, who make available content to those without having to spend money on internet data. That was obviously to align with our evolving business practices, that it's all in the digital space, not just about socializing anymore. Next slide, please. We then introduced a business support hotline. And as of today, basically, this will be the official start date. We have had a soft launch a couple of weeks ago. And this is for women entrepreneurs to access information and services provided by the WBRC without a physical visit. This is kind of cool, actually, because, the WBRC has always been known as a resource hub, a central location. We can come in and ask some questions. And if we don't provide it, we send you on the right way or the right path to tell you where you can actually access it. So essentially, we've got, physically housing some hotline operators and essentially doing myriad of shifts. They're available throughout the working week, and support information, good, strong referrals, making sure there's quality assurance around those referrals, and making sure that it's also available and inclusive for people with a disability, which has been very exciting to incorporate as well. When we move forward, we actually also introduced an e-library. So an online collection of business resources. This was in direct response to the fact that there is just a severe lack and a gap of where to find this information around a variety of things. And of course, COVID and assistance for finance. But, often people will ring up and ask for, do we know about other programs similar to us that do different things? Jane's just dropped into the chat the actual link to find the e-library, where you're more than welcome to go and have a look around. You can't break it. We're very proud of this. And this is a live organic library that will continue to grow. We've got abridged versions of certain policies. Very excited to launch that. And the resources are available in English and Talk Pisin, and also available through our website, which is www.pngwbrc.com. And finally, we have commenced activities over the last 6 months to form a PNG hotline coalition. And this is essentially to look at the space. It's not just about customer service either. It's more about making sure that this hotline customer care type of space, given that we've all moved to more of a virtual process with business, we want to make sure that we're learning from our partners who have already been doing it. And so they've had the challenges, they've learned from them. And so we're not starting from scratch. We've had some fantastic conversations already, people and companies, entities that are very keen to jump on board and be part of this initiative. Sorry, I'm just leaning down to plug my computer in. This is lacking in the space. And so there's been a couple of different actual platforms and operating systems that we've learnt about. And so with this coalition, the idea is to make sure that, our entrepreneurship focus on the information we're providing. It doesn't matter that we're doing that, another hotline entity might be providing something else, but essentially the functionality and increased resources in information sharing can only benefit the entire space, and of course benefit the beneficiaries as well. Shared solutions to shared problems and so forth. So that's been kind of cool, and that's been our business response programs that's CIPE specific. I'm going to ask our technical engine room to please now, if you wouldn't mind playing the two testimonials for the business advisory coaching that commenced in March, April this year, and was delivered via TDI. So the first one we're going to see is a testimonial from one of the SME recipients, Gladys Kelly. If you can please cue the
I found this
video
coaching
now.
very helpful because it has helped me understand my business, get clearer on my goals and priorities, feel more confident, understand what had been holding me back, and better understand my business model and how it operates.
Thank you. And before we go to the next one, one key thing about running the business advisory coaching is TDI, as I've said, are industry experts. But the idea is long-term sustainability for having local business coaches is imperative, for us to manage. And so part of the program also involved a training of the trainer. We had 6 local business coaches. It was a very competitive process to have the coaches join. They've been going through the entire process with TDI, and the idea is that we are then building capacity and depth in this industry within Papua New Guinea as well. So, we'll reduce the need to actually access external overseas consultants, and we have those resources right here in country. So the next testimonial is from one of the current local business coaches that is undergoing that training at the moment as well throughout the program. If you can please cue that video, Tech Room. Hello. Oh, there we go. It's coming up now.
The big thing that I'm sort of taking away from this program is the learning. When 2 years ago, I wouldn't have pushed myself forward to be a coach. I would have been confident, but now I am. And in fact, I'm so confident that I'm holding my first ever coaching workshop on the 26th of this month here in Port Moresby.
So incredibly exciting with regards to that. As I said, that's just one testimonial from a participant, one from the business coach. And the idea is that we really want to make sure that we expand out that particular program and look at redesigning. That is a pilot for this year. As far as we're aware, it's been, very, very well received. There's been some positive impact made, and we'll be able to share findings around that as well early in 2022. But what I did want to share as well as part of our launch for our business support hotline is just a short video that we're going to be running in English, Tokpisin and Hirimotu to advertise our business support hotline, which we're incredibly excited and proud of, and hope to learn from other hotline industry experts that have already been operating. So if I could please ask our tech room to play, I think we're playing the Tokpisin one.
Coronavirus iwan pala sick no good. Time you kiss him this pala sick by your skinny hat, kus no sotmin. Time you bong one time all nara pala man meri, all by kiss him sick. Time all this pala nara pala tu I bong one time all ara pala man meri, all tu I kiss him sick. Behind him talks have a long old government na noken make him big pela bong. Stop long way long narapela. Noken sekan. Noken tasim eye, nose na mouse belong you. Time you kusi go inside long elbow belong you. Wasim hand one time soap na wara all get a time. Time you make him walk belong you, no can walk close to. Give him space long you na one walk belong you. Eme big pela something long you mi senes na behind him new pela passing, long help him economy belong you mi ego big pela. Long more talk save, you can ring in PNG WBRC Business Support Hotline long digital phone number 7406 5529 7173-6367 na B mobile phone number 7868-6069 7868-6070. Stop him this pala sick coronavirus long igo big pala. PNG WBRC Business Support Hotline emi come up long road belong Halivim na support belong Australia government.
Thank you so much. So that brings us to a close for, just a quick snapshot of what we've done in terms of our business support programs to build business resiliency as a result of COVID-19. There is a fact sheet that is available at our website. We're happy to share it after today as well, and that gives you a quick overview of those particular programs. But at any given time, we're always contactable for you to follow up as to what exciting work CIPE is doing. But we've been very pleased with the survey findings, and also it seems that, even though there's an urgent need for help in finance, markets, information, business skills, coaching, mental health, women appear to be more confident. They're hopeful despite the pandemic, and despite the ongoing situation, it enables them to persevere. They're keeping their businesses afloat besides the pandemic, and our women are resilient. So that's been really exciting to sort of unfold and, I guess, watch this space. But I'm going to hand back to my esteemed colleague, Jane, who, as usual, Jane and the team in DC are incredibly supportive of our field team here in the country. Jane has almost become a Papua New Guinean. She's been up here a long time, so she understands the space really well and is often on the phone with us, regardless of whatever crazy time it is over in the States. But from me, I'm really thankful to have had some time with Annette and John today. It was a fantastic discussion, as well as our guests that joined us, on the forum as well. But Jane, over to you to close out. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellie. I've been working on the PNG portfolio at CIPE for a few years now, and I feel honored and energized every single time we're talking about how we can improve the environment for women in business in PNG. There's just so much good energy in Papua New Guinea that it's super exciting. But as we close, during one of the preparation calls for this event, one of the panelists asked, so what's next? What are you guys doing next with this? And in the same way that last year we took this information and really analyzed it to reassess what kind of services we were providing, that's the plan moving forward for us at the WBRC. We plan to take this information and inform our programmatic decisions. And in the same way that we hope that the data that we provide to other stakeholders will be used in the same way, that it'll inform funding decisions in particular, as well as program development. And furthermore, we really hope that this evidence, that this data has been valuable enough that, firstly, the community continues to respond to our phone calls and answer these questions, but also that donors will put the resources and dedicate the resources so that we can continue to collect this data. I'd like to take a moment just to really thank the Economic Governance and Inclusive Growth team at DFAT, as well as the leadership of APT Associates, who's walked us through this process. And of course, the gender team at DFAT is sort of our home base that supports us and helps us keep going in all of our programming. But additionally, I'd like to, extend a special thanks to the TDI, the Difference Incubator team, who's really helping us, build sustainability and locally drive these initiatives forward. With the business coaching and the capacity building of local business coaches. And finally, I can't end this without thanking our local team, who really were at the forefront of collecting all this data. You've seen me, you've seen Ellie as part of our team, but behind this, there is a whole team that has worked, tirelessly, calling people again and again to make sure we're properly capturing their experiences. And so, to the team at the WBRC, thank you so much for your efforts. And thank you, John and Annette, for your time today and sharing your experiences and thoughts. And to our participants, thank you for staying till the end. And we hope that you found this event insightful and useful wherever you are, either as a donor or as a businesswoman or as a member of civil society. Thank you so much and have a great day.